Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a great day. Today, I'm doing what I'm calling part two of the coverage that we're going to do in class of Hang the Moon, and you can see that it is a total hodgepodge. There are a lot of things we're going to be doing here that may not relate, that may not come together. But as we talk through them, I hope to find a way to unify it by the end of this presentation. But like I said at the start, they may seem to be a very wide variety of things that really don't come together. Let's start with this idea that, again, I'm not a professional YouTuber, that all the borrowed images and quoted text are used for educational purposes to help my students who miss class. I've made a big deal in class about connections. And I think that there are a lot of connections that one can make in this novel, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about them. From Kirkus reviews, you can see two of them. And these two are the, I think, very common views of what Walls happened to do with the novel. One of them is connecting it to Tudor England, and the Duke being Henry VIII, Eddie being Edward, Cecil being a counselor, the whole thing here. And the television program Succession might also be part of that. The idea of just passing things down from generation to generation to generation. People who talk about the Tudor connection talk about Mary Kincaid being Bloody Mary, Sally being Elizabeth I. There's a whole list of connections that people make to the Tudors. One of the connections I hope everybody can make in this book are when you look at a quotation like this one: the tiny hands, the idea that this infant will grow up and make someone tremble with fear, clap with joy, wondering what the future holds for this infant, wondering what this infant will be able to do, I hope takes us back to the sense of wonder from the superhero's journey. The idea that it's beautiful, the idea that we should notice and we should notice everything, I think is a big part of that book. And I think there are scenes in this book that should take us back to that. Those of you who had me in class last semester, we certainly talked about wonder and connecting wonder with the Anthropocene Reviewed. My connection, and those of the link will be down below, but is to the Soggy Sweat whiskey speech. One of the things that I've noticed on the passage that's up on the slide right now, whiskey was part of daily life. It was medicinal. It was a pain soother for both the body and the spirit. At the same time, it was destroying families. Dutch Weber was drinking when he started the fight that got him killed at the very beginning of the novel. All of those things were true. And so you can play the link. It's John Grisham reading the Soggy Sweat whiskey speech, where Soggy kind of makes fun of the whole idea of having to have an absolute stand. That said, for your research paper, you don't get to be Soggy Sweat. Okay? You have to take a stand. The other connection I want to make very quickly is this statement here and the logical fallacy, no true Scotsman. If you're truly a Kincaid, in other words, no Kincaid is going to sit this one out. If you're truly a Kincaid, you have to take this stand on this issue at this time. The no true Scotsman fallacy has the idea that no true Scotsman does X or Y or Z. No true Kincaid will sit this one out. If you sit this one out, or if you're a true Scotsman who puts brown sugar on his porridge, you're not a true Scotsman. The argument defends an assertion by disallowing all counterexamples. There are only true examples, and the true examples do exactly what the person says they do. Only the true examples do what they say. And I think I'll come back to that at the end just briefly. I stole this from the Palomar website that does some logical fallacies. The other thing that I need to get to for the next 5-6 slides or so is making this novel connect to us in the year of our Lord 2024. The novel's set in 1921, and there are a lot of things that I think we assume are buried in the past. At the same time, those things might not be buried in the past for everyone. Okay, so Sally couldn't become a senator or a governor. She couldn't take over the family business, according to the Duke. So she's limiting herself to becoming the fastest girl in the world. The idea of the glass ceiling, the idea of women kind of being kept out of the boardrooms is, I think, a discussion that continues to happen. The amount of money women make versus the amount of money men make seems to be disparate. All of those things, I think, are still happening or still being discussed, still being argued about over 100 years after this book, after the setting of this book. The idea of status and gatekeeper, how one should dress, how one should behave, those who don't get their hands dirty versus those who have to work. There's no ifs, ands, and buts that is still an issue. Gatekeepers keeping people out of professions or trying to keep people out of professions, or saying that if you enter this profession, you have to be this sort of person. You can see the photo from Downton Abbey, the white gloves, the idea again of certain people trying to make sure they set themselves apart from other people who aren't, quote unquote, their people. The next one, the idea of truth in media. In the year of our Lord 2024, we're arguing about news, we're arguing about what's truth, we're arguing about what's a lie. We have fake news, we have alternative facts, we have all of this stuff. And at the same time, we have the situation of, is there any one thing that's out and out wrong? Or is everything strung together to make it one big lie? Will people swallow it? We're arguing about that all of the time. We've got politicians arguing about it. People argued about it during the pandemic. People argue about it about vaccines. People argue about it with the effects of alcohol, the effects of drugs. People cherry pick their facts. And the idea of trying to come to a sense of truth, I think, is an important question. And so, once again, the book at least leads us, maybe not deep into it, and maybe it's not deep enough at all, but the book at least makes us think about what are the facts and what should we do with the facts and how should we approach the facts. And can we distinguish a fact from an opinion? Can we distinguish facts from out and out lies? And going to facts and out and out lies, if you look at the picture from about the Tulsa race massacre of 1921, when I first heard about the Tulsa Race Massacre 45, 50 years ago, whenever it was that I encountered it in an educational setting, it was called the Tulsa Race Riot. And there was the story was sort of spun that it was blame both sides. Again, in the year of our Lord 2024, are we still scapegoating people? People who, you know, aren't quote unquote our kind of people? Are we blaming others for our problems? Are we trying to have situations where they are stirred up? We stir people up to make sure they're not our kind of people. This one's about African Americans, but I think Walls could have easily written the same story about immigrants in the 1920s, certainly Prohibition. And in her interview, she even talks about this. Prohibition was as much about, immigrants, the Italians coming in with a lot more wine, the Germans coming in with some beer, the Irish coming in with beer and whiskey, the Scotch coming in with whiskey. Those sorts of people, those sorts of immigrants were one of the reasons Prohibition sort of happened. So I think it's important to put that all in perspective as well. The question of sexuality. I'm pretty sure I've got this football card in my collection someplace. But once again, was it a thing in the 1920s to talk about it, to ignore it? I think Walls, as she writes about it and writes about Sally's reaction, I think pretty much creates the same situation that I came across or that I grew up in the 1960s. I don't think anybody knew about Jerry Smith. This card is probably from 69 or 70. I can't remember which one. But I don't think anybody knew about Jerry Smith then until much later when he was diagnosed with AIDS and people discovered he had opened a gay bar in Dallas. Those sorts of things I think are important as we take a look at it, and some of you I think might believe she's pushing an agenda a bit too hard and a bit too far. So the question is, how should we react? Is Walls pushing a set of facts and truths, perhaps uncomfortable ones, on us? And how should we react to those facts and truth? Is it just a story? And we should just take it as just a story? Or is it propaganda from people in power trying to persuade us against things that we should never think about? How should we react? And I'm going to offer just a couple of them. Number one, it's a story. Rod Dreher may now, 10, 15 years after this quotation was first put in print, a good story is a good story. And he goes on to talk about should be able to read Tolstoy, you should be read to other stuff. And if it's a well-told story, we should all see ourselves in the characters and the lives they lead, no matter what their race, their class, their culture. And I think one can take a look, whether you lived in small town South Dakota, which made you relate to the things in small town Virginia, or whether you lived in Los Angeles and look at how, the small town life and how people treat each other doesn't seem that different. That's one way to do it. It's just a good story, and we should look at the characters and see ourselves in their lives. The other thing I think we should always be looking at is I think it's the purpose of all art. Allegedly, this statement was first made about journalism, but I think it's the purpose of all art, whether it's novels, painting, or whatever all else. to provide a little comfort to the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And so, if this book has somehow made us all a little uncomfortable, or if we've been feeling left out and made us identify with a character or two, then it's probably done its job. I'm going to wrap it up here. Like I said, this was something of a hodgepodge, but I think it's important to take a look at the book, take a look at what she's doing. You can argue that it's too much 2024 in a 1921 book. It's entirely possible. You can also argue that it all had to be there because no matter what one thinks, the times truly haven't changed. People are still people. Hope everybody has a good day. Hope to see you all in the next class period.